Hi everyone, Springthony Board Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new The World is a Beautiful Place and I'm No Longer Afraid to Die album EP, really, Between Bodies. These guys are a Connecticut-based emo and indie rock act whose full-length debut album that came out not too long ago impressed me enough to talk about it. Because personally, lately, I have been mighty underwhelmed by much of what people would be calling the emo revival right now, which I think naming it as such is a little disingenuous, given that emo began in the mid-'80s and has continued to exist as a thriving, relevant, underground rock movement since then. Not to mention that just 10 years ago, this genre was at its peak of cultural relevancy. And it is no longer at that level of relevancy because every musical trend and movement has a shelf life. It has a certain span of time at which it holds the general public's attention, and you must either evolve or accept niche relevancy. Take jazz music into account, which evolved heavily through the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and punk music from the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And emo has undergone similar evolutions as well, but I'm finding very little novelty in this latest strain of groups. But I get it. Emo is not really sold on the premise of being progressive or experimental, rather cathartic emotionally. The genre appeals through its punk energy with an emphasis on melody and poetic lyrics and sort of twinkly guitars and impassioned vocal performances, albeit a little angsty. Many of these newer groups have stuck very passionately to this blueprint, and as has The World is a Beautiful Place. However, I did find this group to be a little bit more dynamic, experimenting with post-rock, huge chorus vocals, even a little bit of sort of weird, kitschy, gimmicky novelty music on some of their EPs, and they are on another experimental jaunt on this new EP of theirs as well, Between Bodies. This time, the band is providing instrumentals and some backing vocals, occasionally some lead vocals as well, as atop all of this instrumentation and singing, we get spoken word from Mr. Chris Zizamia. On nearly every track here, Chris can be heard delivering these shouted declarations on life, death, time, space, stars, the beginning, the end, pretty much everything. And when I say everything, I don't mean like bricks and bottles and ballpoint pens, everything. I mean, I'm trying to say something super important and super deep right now, everything. And as I said earlier, these poetic diatribes are supported by The World is a Beautiful Place's typically slow, twinkly, melodic rock instrumentation. These instrumentals are dynamic, they progress in a very linear fashion. Maybe this is something the band is experimenting with a little bit more here because they're not working with a verse, chorus, verse structure. They can just kind of move as they please as long as you can hear Chris's vocals audibly, or maybe just sort of intensify as he intensifies. Some of the instrumentals are really slow burners, they're growers. Some have a really strong backing beat, they're a little straightforward, and others are much more abstract and noisy. The band does a really great job of complementing Chris. I think Chris does a great job of complementing the band performance-wise. I actually enjoyed this album quite a bit in concept, even though this sort of thing has really turned me off in the past, especially in the case of bands like Listener, where you're kind of getting these generic indie rock instrumentals just kind of playing in the background with some spoken word on top that is just cringeworthy. There's even something about the tracks on this EP that reminds me of a recent Snap Judgment story or performance that you can check on YouTube with someone, a 15-year-old by the name of Noah St. John, telling a story about his mother's getting divorced, and they're driving in this CRV, and he thinks that they're going to break up in front of him, but then in fact he learns that they're going to be staying together and their family is forever, and so on and so forth. It's very moving. To me, this new EP kind of functions on a very similar premise. However, it's not quite as effective, and in my opinion, it could have been more effective because the recording on this thing is great, the band plays really well, I think the instrumentals they come together with are great, the vocals are nice, but after a few tracks on this record, in my opinion, Chris becomes difficult to stand. Honestly, it's like he's trying to force this sense of importance in everything that he's saying. He's trying to force this sense of emotional weight in everything that he's saying. He's just freaking out over the most obvious and common of statements, like, oh, we're made of the same stuff as the stars. Like, maybe that statement has some kind of impact if you're hearing it for the first time on this record, but that has been said again and again and again, and there's nothing about Chris's approach to saying this line and many other adages on this record that is really all that stunning or emotionally moving. Not only that, but I don't really feel like he backs up anything that he says, because he seems to just rattle off one abstract idea after another. Maybe there are some very real, coherent, tangible things that inspired some of these songs, but you wouldn't really know it from just observing the lyrics in the abstract. It's like Chris tries to get to everything, and because he doesn't focus on any of it, it sort of all adds up to nothing, which is kind of a shame, because I think in concept this EP was really great. I like the instrumentals, but the lyrics play just too big a part in the making of this record to just outright ignore them and just enjoy everything else about the record. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this thing. Transition, if you've given this record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, have a nice day. Music forever.